How's the balance sound in the room? George, could you hear everything okay?
Yeah, I can hear everything fine.
Yeah, I was hearing you good in here, man.
Yeah.
People are enjoying this. Keep going. They're loving it, dude.
Okay.
Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. Joined today by an incredible duo, Denny Zeitlin, George Marsh. Welcome.
Hey.
Don't stop the flow, man.
All right.
Keep it going.
I'm just going to turn this stool around here so I can get around here. So let's do another one, George.
All right.
Let's see what happens here now.
Dr. Zeitlin, are these just off the top of your head, or are these actually tunes that you and Marsh have performed before?
This is absolutely, totally free improvisation. No pre-planning for this at all. We just try to get out of the way of the music and let it happen.
How did you know from your earliest age, Denny, that the music was coming through you from a different source, and when did you learn to get out of the way?
Well, to some degree, I think when I was a kid.
Look at the audience here; they want to see you. Yeah. I mean, look at this
I'm
apparatus.
all hardwired here, man.
You are. No, you're good. But when did you learn to get out of the way?
I think when I was a kid. I still have memories when I was about 2 or 3 or 4 years old, climbing around inside the grand piano in my living room, and just playing on the strings and banging on the hammers, and I was just enamored of sound. I was awash in sound, and it was just like a miraculous experience for me, and I just wanted to be the sound. I think I wanted to be an orchestra when I was a little kid. And fortunately, this technology has finally arrived to a place where when I'm playing with George, I actually feel we're part of a galactic orchestra.
A galactic orchestra. Now, the technology is advanced. Like, can you explain to the audience how you've been able to get to this point of a galactic orchestra?
Well, it actually began for us back in the late 60s. Around 1967, I began to get impatient with what I felt were the limitations of the acoustic piano sound. You know, the piano's amazing, but you can't bend notes like you...
Right.
You can't get that sound out of a piano, and you can't sustain certain notes. You can't get this sound out of a piano either. Of course, this made no sound at all. Let's try this. The sound of breath you can't get on the piano. So I wanted to find ways to approximate some of those sounds. So back in the 60s, before all these synthesizers were even developed, I found people to make sound modifying equipment for me. I would put prepared piano stuff on the strings to get new timbres. And George and I got together around 68 or 69 with Mel Graves, a marvelous bass player.
Rest in peace.
And for a decade, we explored freeform music, electroacoustic music, avant-garde stuff. It was a very exciting time, and that's really when this electroacoustic thing really started to blossom for me.
Did you have pickups being put on like Steinways? Can you talk about that early technology that was you were doing to the?
I had all kinds of funny pickups on the Steinway piano, and I would stick screws in between the piano strings to get amazing timbres. And if you put the screw all the way down to the soundboard, you get impossible timbres that are just deliciously weird and wonderful. So I would do all kinds of stuff like that and put books on the piano to get more percussive sounds. And
how did you find time to study?
What?
How did you find time to study for psychiatry?
I don't know. I've always been lucky, Jake, that I was passionate about both fields since I was a kid. My father was a doctor. I remember going on rounds with him in a hospital when I was 4 or 5
Wasn't your
or 6
uncle a
years old.
psychologist?
He was a psychiatrist.
And you remember was he just telling you about what got you hooked on the psyche?
On the psychiatry part of it, I think, was really listening to my uncle initially talk about the people he was working with. I was just fascinated to hear him talk about people would come to him with problems, and they would talk about it, and those problems would start to evaporate. And that seemed like, wow, isn't that something to be a part of something like that? So in 3rd grade, I was practicing psychotherapy without a license.
I love it.
And the kids,
the
kids used to come
They'd
up
say,
and talk with me.
They're like, Denny, I got a I'm worried about this. I mean, they confide in you.
Yeah, and I felt it was a precious gift to be able to be part of that. And it was around that time I was just convinced I wanted to be a psychiatrist someday.
Well, Eddie Henderson was, you were his advisor in residency. We've talked about that a number of times. And he was going, and he walked away from the field. And he went with Herbie.
Yep.
How satisfied are you with where you're at musically at this point?
I feel grateful to have been able to pursue these two fields, Jake, all these years, and to have some kind of a balance between them. I never would have been happy doing one to the exclusion of the others. That's the way I'm made. So fortunately, my parents encouraged me to follow my passions. They never said, well, Denny, now you're in 8th grade. time for you to decide whether you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a musician.
One or the other. Yeah,
They,
linear.
They never
no
made,
linear, yeah.
made some sort of either or about it. They were both and sort of people, and I think I really got that from them.
Well,
that was their gift to me, one of their big gifts to me.
George Marsh, how are you this morning, brother?
Hello.
George, do you wait for Denny to create a melody, or do you start a rhythmic pattern? Can you talk a little bit about your galactic
it's
orchestra?
All of those that you just said. Today there was quite a few places where I was leading, and then there were places where Denny was leading, and other days it would be Denny's leading it, but somehow even if one of us is leading, we're still together. There's a sameness about. I'm gonna take these things off.
Yeah.
There's a sameness about it. If you're accompanying, you're still part of what's going on. So I feel what we're creating is the music.
Did you and Denny have it? Was the conversation instant with you guys? I mean, when you first started to play together back in the late '60s.
That's a long time ago. I think the first time I played with Denny, I went and sat in at the Trident. I don't know if Denny remembers that, but a friend of mine, I think it was Bill Matthew at the time, somehow introduced me to Denny, and I was really into pulses and exploring different pulses. And when I sat in, I remember Denny's remark after that: "There's a pulse still happening." A fast pulse. I don't know whether Denny remembers it. Like
I remember that now. I remember saying that.
yeah. And so, and I've told Denny this, but when I heard his records on Columbia, I heard myself in that trio. Get that other drummer out of there. Not really that, but I heard myself in there. And through friends, we ended up playing together, and it just seemed to work out. It was, I think, one thing is I had to sub for someone over at what was it, Conservatory of Music in San Francisco, and I kind of knew how to play with Denny's music. It just
This is simpatico. Well, I mean, the audience they're tired of me asking questions. They want to see you perform. So we got Denny Zeitlin here, a master musician and psychiatrist, and Dr. George Marsh as well, faculty at Sonoma State and brilliant bandstand drummer as well. So you want to introduce the tune? You got a name for this one, or is it just going to be free?
All this is going to be totally free music. We don't know where we're going to start and where we're going to stop.
It's the kind of music
where
Jake
it's gonna
Feinberg
go.
loves, all right?
Yeah, it's just let's see.
This is for Jake. This is the name of it.
For Jake, baby.
Yeah.
That's not a bad title at all.
Right.
Wait just a second here. Something's weird in here. Let's see.
What is that apparatus in your that you're blowing into, Denny? Can you talk to the audience about how the?
This is a custom-made breath controller that Vadim Canby, our audio engineer, made for me.
Vadim.
Vadim, he's
Monster.
indispensable member of this group, and this particular breath controller goes into this keyboard.
Right.
This one goes into this particular keyboard, and this one goes up here to different breath-controlled patches I have. So this is the way it goes so that I can ideally go from mouthpiece to mouthpiece while I still have my hands going. Doesn't always work out that easily because you can see these cords get very easily tangled, and we haven't solved one problem with this.
Yes.
Has to do with impedance.
What does that mean? What is
Well,
it's impeding the sound? Is
Well,
that?
it has to do with limitations of how long these cords could be, and still do the breath control. So I'm limited. When I turn like this, it looks like the whole house is going to fall down. So that's one of the things that are works in progress here, is to make this breath control more easily operable. But it's a lot of fun to use because it does allow me to get that sense of playing wind instruments.
Do you start tunes with the?
I might sometimes.
Yeah.
It could start anywhere. Just like, I mean, each time we did this, we started in a different place. You know, just.
I mean, what is most satisfying about playing this kind of music, George? I mean, is it that you're unencumbered, that you can play what you feel, that it's just you're playing with an old partner? What is it all?
A serious answer or a flippant
You-
one?
Hey, it's Saturday morning. Whatever you want.
I've told Denny I do it for the food. No. You haven't met Josephine, maybe. That would explain that. And the wine.
Between Josephine's cooking and my wine cellar, that's the only thing that makes him come and play. He tolerates my music,
that's
man,
the-
but at least he gets properly fed and drunk. Man.
Exactly, that's the most important thing. But you guys are playing great, man. I really dig it. You know,
It's because I said something at the last concert that you saw. I had a piece in which I will ask the players to play sound and tune into sound and let that sound tell you what to do next. I think that explains what we do. Mm-hmm. I'll hear something that Denny does, and if I just let go, something happens, and we want that from one another. Now, you might work with some other people who say, what are you doing? But in this case, we're able to go to that place just always. And it feels pretty great today, and there's some days we say, let's take a break, you know. It's not always perfect, of course.
well, people around the world they're really enjoying it. I mean, Denny, is it about tension and release with Mr. Marsh?
Well, that's a dimension of what happens with
Right.
music, that it breathes and that it approaches more tense parts, it has more relaxed parts. But I think to go on with the kind of the description George is making, the metaphor of what it's like to play together, to me is when we're playing our best, we're both just listening to music. We don't even have that much of a conscious feeling of producing it. I'm never thinking of, here's a good time for an F minor seventh. You know, it's just, we're awash in this music together, and we're just almost like we're in the audience listening to, hey, this is pretty interesting. Where is this going to go?
Right.
And it's that sense of just allowing music to emerge.
Well, I'm not going to stop you from your unbridled enthusiasm. Please. I mean, there was a tune, Denny, about a bird and an egg laying in a nest. This was on a couple of albums.
Right, yeah.
And you were riffing on it. Do you remember that tune?
Pterodactyls?
The pterodactyl tune.
Yeah.
And that was the thematic thing about like the egg breaking, and then it's faint in my memory. Last time we were on the radio, you were talking about that.
Yeah. That was an album some years ago. But yeah. Sometimes we might have a programmatic idea involved, but really what George and I have been really experimenting with is just no preconceived stuff at all, other than just we might on occasion say, let's start at the same moment. We might do a 1, 2, 3, and we don't know what happens on 3, but we agreed we're going to start on 3. You know.
Why don't we do that?
Okay, let's do that.
Well, maybe on 4.
On 4?
We could vary
I
it.
don't know that I can do 4, man. But let's
3.
try.
Let's do it on 3.
Maybe I better do 3. I'm
All
going to
right.
get mixed up, man.
Yeah, just do it. Keep it on 3. I love it.
right,
Denny
let's-
Zeitlin, George Marsh, live on the Jake
All
Feinberg
right.
Show, Saturday morning here in Fairfax or wherever we are.
I don't think it's Fairfax. You gonna count?
In a moment, I just have to. I'm selecting something new here. A little different
okay.
patch here, just for
It's getting warm in here.
hats.
It's getting warm in here.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
You want to talk about how Mel Graves fit himself into your trio, George? As a bass player, how would you fit in? I know you guys have been doing.
I think he was, besides playing the basic time grooves, he was always making up very interesting counter melodies. That's a lot of what he did when we're in the free playing, especially. And groups of 5 superimposed over 4, really very complex stuff that even later, when I listened to things we had recorded, I kind of said, oh, that's what Mel was doing. There was a kind of an independence that he had, and he heard what we were doing in a different way, which is great. But that's kind of my perception of it. Along with we matched energies a lot. We like to really hit it, be strong about it.
Well, that sounds right on, George.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good description of special things that Mel brought to the game.
Was Mel incorporate? I mean, while you were fusing electroacoustic sound in that time, did he bring? I mean, I see him playing the upright. Did he play electric?
We sort of got him into playing electric bass as well, and then we had some sound altering equipment that I sort of assigned to him. I said, Mel, why don't you see if you could work on this effects generator and make it into a kind of a weird solo instrument. And he did, man. He got into it, playing beeps and squawks and all kinds of stuff back then in the late 60s before we had all these synthesizers available.
Can you talk to the audience about that infamous time you played a gig somewhere in Northern California? You had to bring the entire rig up. How often do you guys actually play live? Because you took me through that, but now I get a chance to see in person. I wanted you to talk about the involvement of this live performance of Zeitlin, Marsh, and Graves.
Well, for 10 years we did periodically take the studio, load it onto a truck, go to a gig, take 3 hours to set it up, play the gig, take 3 hours to tear it down, bring it back to the studio, and take another 3 hours to set it up again. It was exhausting.
Oh, I know. That,
I mean, how did you get did you have somebody bring
We had different roadies along
You had
along
roadies?
the way. I actually had a manual of how to disassemble and assemble.
I love this. I love this.
Go through
I
this,
love this.
Go through this thing, man. I mean, one time we were all set to play an electroacoustic gig at the Awani Hotel up in Yosemite. And one of the roadie then at that time, he had a rather makeshift sort of truck with a strange little log cabin in the back of it, And so he loaded all our stuff up, and then we got into a car, drove up to Yosemite, and got all set, waiting for our roadie to arrive with the electroacoustic gear. He never arrived. Fortunately, somebody had a set of drums you were able to use.
barely. No, it was a snare drum that I set on top of a wastebasket. It wasn't a snare drum.
So it was
stand.
but your trap set was in there, not Denny's rig.
Everything was in there. But there was a
in
snare drum on a wastebasket, and it wasn't the best.
So we ended up playing some sort of kind of acoustic oid concert.
Oid.
And the electronics never arrived, man. He got arrested for swerving around on the highway. So that was probably the most
nuts.
disastrous.
But there was also a time, I think it's coming back to me, that where you guys played and
There's nobody there.
0 people in the audience.
yeah.
I mean, that to me pains, that breaks my heart.
This was way up in Mendocino County somewhere at a club, and it was all set, and we dutifully went up there. Turned out they had done 0 advertising. Absolutely
No promotion.
Nothing at all. And so we got in there and we played there. I think it was 1 or 2 people in the club. It was some of the best music we ever played. We were
I
really
think there was a
into it.
tape somewhere of that.
Boy, man.
And I had brought some African
great night.
Atumpan drums, big drums. I don't know if you remember those. I was talking drums and a steel drum and all these, all this stuff. We had a ball, man.
Marsh, I talked to the people around the world about, it's a 2-part question. What do you think of the word jazz? And then, ultimately, how do you increase musical vocabulary on the bandstand?
Wait a minute. I don't think.
I
don't think of the word very much, except that it's used.
Well, it was popular music when you were coming up, and I feel like that when labels have made it very difficult for musical vocabulary to expand. But I wanted you to just riff on it.
It was swinging music played mainly by African Americans. This is the 40s, and they were geniuses, and they played so brilliantly that it was actually opened my spirit. It was like spiritual to me. And so it was a cleansing of what might have been some bigotry, not in my family, but in the world. I mean, I heard it like that. It was like these Art Tatum, Charlie Parker, etc. And there were plenty of great white musicians, and it was like, come on in, the water's fine. You were welcome into this music. And there were certain styles, and then starting in the 60s, there was a lot of variations on that style. And it's what I learned from it were those styles, which is how to swing, how to cook, how to play in this kind of time signature. But how to put that, what Wynton Marsalis, I heard him talk about rhythm sections, is the drummer can put the shuffle in it. Well, the shuffle to me means the swinging part.
Yeah.
What is that? There's a lot of mechanistic music and drumming that's really good going on now. That a lot of it was influenced back in the 80s from drum machines.
People playing machine parts.
But yeah, well, there's a lot of drum compositions that people put into those, and it was interesting. But the shuffle wasn't in there, the real one, which varies from player to player. So that's just one aspect. But then there's also just complete free improvisation, which includes, I suppose, what you would call jazz. And then there's the popular form of jazz where there's just sort of mechanistic rhythm sections with soloists on top. I suppose that's jazz. I don't call it that, though. So that's my personal view of the word, and I know a lot of people just throw the word away. They don't even use it.
Denny, did you go to... Was Birdland still around when you were at Columbia?
Birdland, let's see.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who were some of your... Did you get to see some of the African-American masters of music playing when you were in grad school? And who... I mean, I know George Russell was a guy you bounced ideas off of, and you guys talked a lot, and he was influential, but...
Well, my main influences really were from Chicago. Growing up in the suburb of Chicago, I started playing jazz when I was in high school. Really.
Did you know Ahmad, or was Ahmad Jamal?
I didn't know him personally, but I certainly got to hear him at the Pershing, and that was wonderful. And,
you saw him there when he was at his residency there.
Yeah. And there was a number of good jazz clubs in Chicago back then in high school. The Blue Note was an amazing club which would bring in big bands. So I got to hear Kenton, Count Basie, Duke Ellington there. And then there was a whole bunch of clubs on the south side of Chicago, which was, back in that time, was mostly an African neighborhood. And I got a chance to go and hear Blakey and jazz.
Did you get to go see Howlin' Wolf and those guys?
No.
Did you see any of the blues masters? Because that was hot. It was a hotbed.
Yeah, but I wasn't as much into listening to the blues players as I was listening to the bebop players. Because I really started out after just a brief, maybe half a year playing Dixieland in high school. I gravitated into bebop because I had a hunger for the modern harmonies. Mm-hmm. And so I was going to all these, the Stage Lounge, the Beehive, all these places, and then I began to get a chance to sit in with these people. And there was like Johnny Griffin and Iris Sullivan and Bobby Cranshaw and wonderful drummers like
Wilbur Campbell.
Wilbur Campbell, yeah, he was an amazing drummer. Wilbur Ware, the bass player.
Vernell Fournier was out there.
Yeah, Vernell was there. And so it was just a chance to jam with these cats, and that's what allowed me, as a kind of an informal apprenticeship, to begin to get my jazz chops together. I had studied classical music in grade school, but I'd always been much more interested in improvising and composing than reinterpreting a written page of music. That never called to me. So when I heard jazz, I felt like I was shot out of a cannon, man. That was the medium I'd been waiting for all my life.
We're joined here by two incredible people, and it's very humbling to be here with both of you. Maybe just we'll one more tune and we'll wrap.
Sure.
Let's
do it.
Denny Zeitlin, George Marsh, much love to you both, and continue to swing.
Hey, thank you, Jake.
All right.
All right. Let me get my earphones back on here, George. I'll be with you in a
I
moment.
gotta go get my music.
Yeah, right. Set list will be coming.
I found it.
Let's see. Get it over there.
Oh. Okay. Got it happening?
Yeah, let's go. Why don't you start something, George?
Okay.
Dr. Zeitlin,
Yes, sir.
it was an honor. And
Hey.
don't forget about the blues, man. Much love to you, and people online were saying they'd love to have an acoustic gig in San Francisco. Easier said than done. People are clamoring for this stuff because it's improv, it's off the top, and quite honestly, when you guys lock in, it's transcendent.
Well, thank you, man. Thanks for having us on. It's a treat for us to be able to share the music because we can't really carry this out of the studio. So you've allowed us to do that.
Right,
Jake.
we're taking it to the world, and much love to you, Denny.
Hey, thanks, man.
Marsh, we'll do it again soon, man.
Great, man.
All right, much love to you. The Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you tomorrow.